Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here at UDC 21 with so many great critical communication and media studies researchers to present my paper, Unmasking GAFAMs Power, Marx and Foucault Go to Silicon Valley. So over the past decade, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft, or the GAFAM, have grown to become some of the most powerful corporations in the United States, in Canada, and in many countries around the world. The Big Five's market power seems omnipresent and perhaps omnipotent. But what is power, and how do GAFAM possess or operationalize it? To answer this question, my presentation today outlines a structural relational framework that conceptualizes and demonstrates GAFAM's power in a few different ways. We focused on GAFAM's capitalist power, or its ownership and control of capital resources and resource allocation. We focus on GAFAM's state power, its influence on state decisions about public law, policy, and regulation. And we also focus on GAFAM's governmental power, or the governmentality of GAFAM, which I take to mean the deployment of persuasion and coercion to get subjects to act in concordance with GAFAM's preferred ends. This paper's big picture probe of GAFAM's power in this conjuncture is not prescriptive, but suggests that Neomarxist and Neo-Foucaultian premises about power, though different, can be of value to unmasking and analyzing GAFAM's power in society and around the world. So let's start with the neo-Marxist political economy of communications premise. Capitalism is a system in which corporations mobilize technology, human labor, and energy forms to produce and sell goods and services as commodities in markets to profit, rather than to meet social needs. Relatedly, communications and media in capitalism shape and are shaped by capitalism. So integral to communications and media power in capitalism is the ownership and control of these resources. Today, corporations, not workers, not the government, own and control vast communications and media capital, and they do so to enrich their owners. GAFAM's capitalist power then can be manifested or measured with regard to their outsized market value, their market capitalization, their profits, their market concentration, speaking of things like mergers and acquisitions, their ad spend market share, their intellectual property and patents, and also with regard to the wealth of GAFAM CEOs. So consider the following data. The Forbes Global 2021 list ranks GAFAM among the world's top 50 largest corporations in the world by market value. Now, market capitalization is the value of a company that is traded on the stock market, calculated by multiplying the total number of shares by the present share price. In 2020, GAFAM achieved a total combined market capitalization valuation of $6.4 trillion. Now that's a sum greater than the combined 2019 gross domestic product of Australia, Canada, France, and the United Kingdom, four of the world's wealthiest countries. According to Forbes, 3 of GAFAM place in the top 20 most profitable companies in the world. Apple with $63.9 billion in profit, Microsoft with $51.3 billion in profit, and Alphabet Google with $40.3 billion in profit. So over the past decade, GAFAM consolidated an internet oligopoly by merging with or acquiring over 400 corporations encompassing everything from startups to potential rivals. GAFAM are now clearly the global internet's gatekeeper of the biggest platforms and services. The triopoly of Google, Facebook, and Amazon now take over half of the market share of US advertising spending. They already dominated the digital ad sector going into 2020, but increased their share of the US digital ad market from 80% in 2019 to about 90% in 2020. Also, during the pandemic, they came to command the entire advertising economy. So these are now the largest advertising firms in the world, not television and radio broadcast or network companies. GAFAM have concentrated their control over vast intellectual property resources. As of January 24th, 2021, they were some of the world's largest patent holders. Between 2019 and 2021, GAFAM accumulated a record number of new patents, many designed to help management exert new forms of control over the labor process. So last year, Microsoft, the leading GAFAM patent holder, filed a patent for a system to monitor its employees' body language and facial expressions during work meetings and then give these labor process events a quality score, perhaps a new form of digital Taylorism being patented here. GAFAM CEOs are some of the world's wealthiest billionaires, or the richest of the ruling class. Now, GAFAM billionaires like Bezos reportedly accumulate $152,000 per minute and $2,537 per second. In Canada, the median annual pay per worker is $52,600, meaning that Jeff Bezos accumulates more in under 30 seconds than the average full-time Canadian worker makes in an entire year. And given the median annual pay per worker in the United States is less than Canada, the amount that Bezos accumulates vis-a-vis American workers is even greater. Evidently, GAFAM's ownership and control of capital resources is vast, and this owning power affords them immense resources for trying to influence the political process and the US state decision-making processes in society. And that brings us to the very complex yet interesting relationship between capitalism and the state, or what we sometimes call in Marxist terms, the state-capital relation. Here is a neo-Marxist state theory premise about the state whose decision-making processes GAFAM shapes. The state possesses the authority to develop, preserve, or transform the general legal, policy, and regulatory rules of society. But GAFAM allocate a portion of their immense wealth to systematic political influence, to struggle for and exercise forms of state power in society, in the United States, in Canada, and around the world. GAFAM mobilized political advocates, lobbies, think tanks, political action committees, legislators, policymakers and regulators, parties and presidents to try to ensure that the US state will support their private interests and represent those interests in public law, policy, and regulation as the public or national interest. The idea is that what's good for GAFAM is good for America. And what's good for America, of course, according to the doctrine of American exceptionalism, is also good for the world. So consider the following data. Here's the GAFAM's political Rolodex. So GAFAM run their own in-house political advocacy agencies. For example, Facebook's vice president of public policy aims to, quote, ensure Facebook maintains a voice in the public policy discussions that impact its business, employees, and the people that use its products and services. Some of GAFAM pay lobbies and lobbyists to push their specific political interests to different state institutions and decision makers. For example, they leverage the Internet Association, which describes itself as the unified voice of the internet economy, or the Computer and Communications Industry Association, which is described as the eyes, ears, and the voice of the world's leading providers of technology products and services in Washington. And other lobbies like the Information Technology Industry Council, which describes itself as the trusted leader of innovation policy that drives sustainable, ethical, and equitable growth and opportunity for all. So GAFAM mobilized all of these lobbies and many, many more to try to get the state to design the country's overall framework of digital technology, law, policy, and regulation on their behalf, to make sure that the rules of the game are rules that will essentially allow them to win. And by winning, that means maximizing profits, paying dividends to shareholders, and defeating rival companies in the United States and around the world. In 2019, Facebook spent $16.7 million lobbying over 16 federal departments, including the Departments of Commerce, Homeland Security, Justice, Labor, State, the Treasury, Federal Communications Commission, Federal Trade Commission, Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, Patent and Trademark Office, U.S. Copyright Office, and the White House. So, you know, Facebook's not just about lobbying the Communications Commission, it's about lobbying numerous federal agencies to essentially embed its interests institutionally within the state and get the state to facilitate and legitimize its own accumulation interests. In that same year of 2019, Apple spent nearly $2 million lobbying some of the above state institutions and more. GAFAM also mobilized intellectuals across the political spectrum to co-author or support their public policy ideas by donating to major think tanks, both conservative, like the American Enterprise Institute, the Cato Institute, and the Heritage Foundation, and also liberal, such as the Center for American Progress, New America Foundation, and the Progressive Policy Institute. So reactionary and progressive intellectuals clash over many public policy issues, but GAFAM pays both sides of the political spectrum to rally for its interests. As I argue in my recent book with Shad Alvi, EdTech Inc., GAFAM also tried to integrate universities and colleges when partnering with them, and GAFAM are all too eager to be subsidized with privatizable research and development contracts, to take a cut of student tuition and enrollment revenues, and also, of course, to sell edtech goods and services to colleges and universities while tapping precarious student labor along the way. GAFAM operate political action committees such as Google, NetPAC, and Microsoft Political Action Committee to donate to parties and political candidates. So despite Silicon Valley's very liberal brand image, GAFAM PACs spread their political monies around both sides of the aisle. And in 2019, they gave nearly equally to Democrats and Republicans. GAFAM also run a revolving door between themselves and the US state that empowers corporate outsiders to become political insiders and vice versa. As this door spins round and round, GAFAM's private proxies move in and out of public policy shaping positions and craft and enforce digital age policy. So in 2017 and 2018, 93 out of 113 Alphabet Google lobbyists had worked for the US state. In that same period, 76 out of 114 of Amazon's and 42 out of 50 of Facebook's lobbyists had done the same. In the first 3 months of 2019, nearly 75% of the 238 lobbyists for big tech had formerly been employed by the state or by political officials. So clearly, GAFAM are also in the business of shaping the legislative proposals put before the US Congress. In 2019, Facebook tried to shape at least 26 of these bills, including the Save the Internet Act, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2020, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement Implementation Act, and more. In that same year, Amazon paid to shape 81 bills. And in the first half of 2020, GAFAM spent $20 million to try to steer coronavirus relief legislation, perhaps to ensure their pandemic pledge would pay dividends via state procurement contracts to build critical infrastructure. For the past decade, GAFAM have been a top contributor to Democrat presidential campaigns. And in 2020, they put at least $10 million behind Joe Biden's election, hoping to win the favor of the new US president. In the 2020 election cycle, rich white men such as Microsoft board member Reid Hoffman and former Google CEO Eric Schmidt donated a total of $16 million to Democrat-related groups and causes. Unsurprisingly, Biden's political transition team included at least 8 former GAFAM employees. So what does all of this mean? Well, what it means is that GAFAM has enormous means with which to effectively influence state decision-making at all levels. Well, GAFAM are not government. GAFAM shapes state decision-making by indirectly paying or directly pressuring political officials to translate their private interests into public legislative, policy, and regulatory outcomes. Frequently, and perhaps as expected, GAFAM get what they want from the state. This is indicated by the US state's advancement of GAFAM's digital trade interests around the world. This is also indicated by the state's doling out of massive tax breaks to these corporations. This is indicated by billions in public subsidies and massive tax loopholes for GAFAM. This is also demonstrated or indicated in hundreds of procurement contracts with the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So even GAFAM now is part of the military-industrial complex and a major player in the national security state. Okay, so mapping the political economy of GAFAM's power is vital to any substantive understanding of GAFAM's structural power in society. But this macro-level assessment can be supplemented with micro-level interrogations of GAFAM's power relations with subjects. Well, a structural approach to power takes power to be the ownership or control of capital resources and the use of these to influence the major decisions the state makes for all of society. A relational approach takes power to be a dynamic relationship between at least 2 or more entities, with one of those willfully acting to try to get the other to act in ways that align with their strategic goal. As Michel Foucault famously put it, quote, "The exercise of power consists in guiding the possibility of a subject's conduct and putting in order the possible outcome." For Foucault, power was basically tantamount to the effective governance of subjects, or an entity's capacity to structure, quote, "the possible field of action of others and direct the conduct of free individuals or groups of individuals to a desired end." So Foucault's relational approach to power is helpful to conceptualizing GAFAM as being in the business of governmentality. In this relational framework of power, GAFAMs power relations are not hidden behind closed doors in some shadowy corporate or state agency. In this Foucauldian approach, GAFAMs power relations are not bound by the San Francisco Bay region of California, like Silicon Valley, or centralized in the headquarters of Google, Amazon, or Facebook. Rather, a Foucauldian or relational approach to GAFAM's power relations takes these power relations to be diffuse, in motion, and observable at all time within and across every place or space where GAFAM interacts with subjects. So this encompasses things like households, like factories, warehouses, shopping malls, on city streets, through computers and smartphones, via TV sets, as well as in planes, automobiles, trains, and ships, or the means of transportation. Of course, GAFAM is also very, very present in relation to subjects on the internet and the World Wide Web and across all of the platforms they basically own and control. Relatedly, each day, GAFAMs strategize to guide the conduct of subjects, including the politicians they lobby, the companies they do business with, the workers they employ and exploit, the consumers they sell to, the citizens and their conduct in democracy, and the users of their goods and services. And GAFAM tried to guide the conduct of these and other subjects toward ends that they choose. So basically, they're trying to guide subjects in concordance with their overarching objectives, which means policy outcomes, repeat and return clientele, productivity among the workers they employ, brand loyalty, contented or compliant publics, and regularly updated user data profiles. So when GAFAM govern, these corporations structure the field of action of subjects and motivate subjects to do what they might or might not have done of their own volition. GAFAM may guide subjects' conduct in concordance with ends they decide, using a combination of positive and negative techniques, or in a more Gramscian sense, tactics of persuasion and coercion, in the classic formulation of hegemony. So what is a persuasive power relationship? Well, a persuasive power relationship typically involves one entity motivating one or more subjects to identify with and do as it wants them to do with help from moral authority, like follow our lead because we're good and right, and due to positive incentives, like do that and get this in return. So from the 19th century forward, corporations have tried to make themselves look like virtuous social do-gooders in society with help from experts in advertising, public relations, and spin. Today, GAFAM know that it is easier to do as they like in society when subjects, or at least the majority of subjects in society, like them. And so GAFAM put tremendous money and resources into persuasive power relations. So, for example, in response to the recent tech lash, some of the GAFAM ratcheted up newspaper advertising to convince people they have their best interests at heart. Facebook ads and newspaper outlets around the world suggest this leading agent and platform for surveillance capitalism truly respects and protects user privacy. GAFAM launched PR and spin to produce images of themselves as upstanding corporate citizens and shining beacons of corporate social responsibility. Now, despite its partnerships with law enforcement and the servicing of policing, military, and national security state imperatives, and of course its super exploitation of racialized warehouse workers, Amazon trumpets its support for Black Lives Matter. Also, GAFAM's philanthropic initiatives and charitable donations make them look good and let them enjoy big tax breaks. And Microsoft is but one major corporation whose donations work toward integrating non-governmental organizations or NGOs into its advocate and ally. With such generosity from GAFAM comes not so generous political strings that frequently pull more potentially radical political organization to the center, even to the right. GAFAMs governance also entails trying to persuade the subjects that use their sites and services to conduct themselves in accordance with the rules they decide. GAFAM imposes rules upon the interactive agency and the self-expression of the subjects logged into and using the internet sites and services they own and try to control. Now, GAFAM do not let their subjects, constituted as users, use their sites and services without first inviting and requiring their users to freely click I agree or I accept to terms of service and community guidelines that rationalize appropriate and inappropriate communicative conduct and self-expression. Now, of course, GAFAM decide what is and is not allowed or permitted on their platforms, but they try to get their users to take responsibility for their own conduct and the conduct of other users as well. Now, most people don't read these terms, and so the consensual basis for agreement with them is negligible. Nonetheless, they're presented by GAFAM and legally binding as such as free choices made by users of these sites and services. So what is a coercive power relationship? Well, a coercive power relationship usually entails one entity motivating and getting one or more other subjects to conduct themselves as it wants them to by making threats. For example, act this way that we've determined to be good or right, or else there'll be consequences. Another sort of coercive power technique is punishment or the deliverance of punishments. For example, you acted this way that subverted the action we prescribed or broke the rules, and this is the penalty for your offense. Now, in the case of GAFAM, these corporations employ coercive tactics, such as threats and punishments, to try to ensure that all those subjects they interact and transact with play by and obey the rules of their designed game. For example, Amazon threatened to cancel the building of its headquarters in New York City unless New York State gave it $3 billion in public subsidies. Apple supposedly punishes foreign manufacturers of Apple devices by canceling contracts or ceasing business relations when they fail to follow Apple's supplier code of conduct, even though these rules are not always or infrequently enforced. And of course, there are many stories of them being broken. Google has used threats to deter workers from unionizing and reporting sexual harassment. Facebook, meanwhile, punishes users by deplatforming them or deleting their accounts when they break its terms of service and community guidelines. So GAFAM's coercive tactics may effectively achieve the ends to which they are put, but may also result in discontent and backlash, creating new governmentality challenges for GAFAM to try to manage. In sum, to unmask GAFAM's power, the Marxist starting point is primary. The more capital resources GAFAM own and control, the more easily they can coordinate campaigns to influence the decisions the state makes for everyone else. And with greater capital resources, GAFAM enjoys greater capacity to plan and effectively governmentalize the conduct of subjects with persuasion and coercion. I hope this presentation, Unmasking GAFAM's Power, Marx and Foucault Go to Silicon Valley, is a useful entry point for conceptualizing and critically analyzing GAFAM's power in the United States, in Canada, and around the world. Thank you for listening and watching, and an even bigger thank you to the Union for Democratic Communications for organizing this presentation.